These early scenes of the Eastern Fleet were taken in 1942 on board the battleship Resolution, when the war situation in the Far East was very precarious. The Dorsetshire, Cornwall and Hermes had already been lost, though of interest, no footage of them exists in our film archives. But finding such anomalies in the collection is typical, and faced with such limitations, it does present a severe handicap in trying to produce a so-called definitive documentary video history. Thus, as throughout this series, I can only endeavor to present the best of what film has survived in as near chronological order as possible, limiting my narrative primarily to only a complimentary guide. But with the usual inherent characteristic of archive film being silent, it does leave one with the perpetual problem of devising a suitable real-life sound background, being always noticeably absent in wartime-produced newsreels, except for the usual predominance of gunfire. One should also take note that these independent newsreel companies did destroy large amounts of unused archive film, for saving such material for a nation's posterity was never considered a commercial option. But now, some 50 years on, it does make it difficult in trying to present a comprehensive pictorial record, and if some scenes appear exceptionally short, it is through no fault of my own film editing, as I try to archive collection of today, such as these representative views of the Eastern Fleet with the warspite now in view, to be followed by the Devonshire, Mauritius, Resolution, Nizam, Catterick, Gambier, and the Frobisher. This censored wartime film edit obviously hides the identity of this destroyer, but what is more conspicuously absent are views of the other three old R-class battleships, namely Ramillies, Royal Sovereign, and Revenge, plus the carriers Formidable and Indomitable. Though now in view is a destroyer Paladin. She took part in the rescue of many survivors from the cruisers Dorsetshire and Cornwall. Caught on camera late April 1942 is the destroyer Lookout, as a task force under the command of Admiral Seifert gathered at Durban for the assault on the island of Madagascar. Here also is the Malaya and the ill-fated cruiser Hermione, plus the Illustrious, though the following old familiar scenes were filmed en route via Freetown, with Admiral Seifert's Neptune party being held later on board the Malaya.
Magazine, will you? For Christ's sake. All right, cheers. Cheers, Mickey. You got trouble out of man and bring drinking all that. Get in there, boy. You toy. You in there. Get in. You go in there, Carl. There you go. Push him out. Hands in and pull him out.
Admiral Seifert would transfer his flag to the Ramillies, seen here with the destroyer Anthony berthed alongside, She had arrived from Mombasa, to where Admiral Somerville had been forced to withdraw his main fleet due to the ominous danger of a Japanese carrier force in the Trincomalee area. The capture of the Vichy French bastion of Madagascar was necessary to alleviate the danger of it falling to the Japanese, giving them complete domination of the Indian Ocean. Of interest, two of the troop ships present in this operation, the Oronsay and the Duchess of Athol, would both be lost later that year. Some of the others comprised of the Winchester Castle, Sobieski, and Otranto, while a second carrier, the Indomitable, was also present. The main focal point of the assault would be the Diego Suarez Bay, and in this terribly edited wartime film of the event, there is a brief glimpse of the ill-fated destroyer La Forêt. Within a short space of time, the island was finally secured, but the Ramillies, which had remained in the Diego Suarez area, was badly damaged by a Japanese midget submarine. She eventually reached Plymouth for repairs, and it would be almost a year before she returned to Ceylon.
Off the watch. Make sure Illustrious has got that report.
Aye, sir.
The Illustrious would now join the Eastern Fleet, but Formidable and Indomitable were soon withdrawn due to pressing need in the Mediterranean, and events in the Indian Ocean were kept to a very low profile, such as convoy patrols, depicted here by this unknown sloop.
Finally picked up.
Just received, sir. Make a signal to all vessels in the convoy. Very good, sir.
Make a signal, Chief Yeoman.
Aye, aye, sir.
We now move forward in time to early 1944, finding Admiral Somerville on the quarterdeck of his new flagship, the battleship Queen Elizabeth, while trailing astern are other new replacements, the Valiant, Renown, and the French battleship Richelieu, vastly improving the strike capabilities of the Eastern Fleet. The Richelieu had passed into Allied hands at the port of Varennes during Operation Torch, and it was good to have the French Navy back in full accord with the RN against a common enemy. One only wishes, however, that similar good views of the Valiant and Renown had also existed in our archive film collection, but sadly, it was not so. Since January of 1943, the Eastern Fleet had been without carrier support until the Illustrious returned 1 year later. The Victorious had also been expected, but her departure had been delayed to enable her to take part in attacks on the German battleship Tirpitz, harbored in a Norwegian fjord. Thus, the U.S. Navy temporarily assigned one of their carriers to take part in combined attacks on Sumatra. This carrier was the Saratoga, seen here sailing in company with the Illustrious. Two such attacks were made during the months of April and May, codenamed Operation Cockpit and Operation Transom. After the completion of these operations, the Saratoga would return to her compatriots in the Pacific, but not before she received a fond farewell as she passed down the line of the Eastern Fleet. A cruel fate did await the Sarah, for she was expended in the 1946 Bikini Lagoon atomic bomb experiment, which also included the RN's old adversary, Prince Eugen. Humorously known to the lower deck as Scarpa with palm trees was the obscure replenishment base of Adu Atoll, as here we see the flagship taken on board fuel as an unknown destroyer also lays alongside. It was not unusual for the destroyers themselves to be refueled at sea from the larger capital ships, and we're about to see some excellent footage of the quick match doing just that. On another occasion, it was the turn of G-25, the largely Australian manned destroyer Nepal. On station, there arrived the new cruiser Ceylon, where we find Admiral Somerville playing host to a party of Ceylonese dignitaries. Other cruisers, such as the Kenya, Gambia, Nigeria, Newcastle, Phoebe, Cumberland, and the Suffolk, were also present, but I could find no existing footage of them at Trincomalee in the film archives. But be that as it may, Admiral Somerville was about to embark upon his last assignment before being temporarily relieved by Admiral Bruce Fraser. And as the fleet got underway in July 1944 to attack the island of Sabang, Operation Crimson would be, as he so aptly put it, his final going-away party. It was his strongest fleet to date, consisting of 10 destroyers, 7 cruisers, which included Tromp of the Netherlands Navy, the newly arrived Victorious, the illustrious, renowned, valiant Richelieu, and the flagship Queen Elizabeth, on board which this divine service is about to be seen taking place.
Sir? Sir? I'm from RPO in all stations. Very good, sir.
Let us pray. O Lord God Almighty, let thy blessing be upon this ship and upon all those who serve and sail in her. May good success and thy protection and the guardianship of the holy angels always be with them. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
In their Eastern Fleet guise, Corsairs and Barracudas are about to begin their assault on Sabang. As the aircraft left to attack the Japanese-held airfields, the fleet prepared to commence bombarding the harbor installations.
5 minutes to go. Well, watch it, all of you.
Finally, Captain Onslow on the destroyer leader Quilliam would lead a force of destroyers, which included the Quality and Quick Match, plus the Dutch cruiser Tromp, to sail close inshore and complete the bombardment.
Yeoman, make to Tromp, 6,000 yards, course 250, speed 22.
As the aircraft returned to the carriers, it did quickly become apparent that Admiral Somerville's long frustrating period of command had come to a highly successful close, and the Japanese were now becoming far more aware of a British naval presence in the Far East. And also coming to a close was the service of these Barracuda aircraft, for immediately after the force returned to Trincomalee, the Illustrious would set sail for a much-needed refit at Durban, and her Barracudas would be replaced with the superior American Avengers, thus closing one further chapter of her illustrious wartime career. Seen resting at anchor in Trincomalee is the cruiser London, having arrived on station in March 1944. She had spent over 2 years in Arctic waters, so perhaps some of the old hands welcomed the changing climate. Of greater significance, however, was the arrival 5 months later of the battleship Howe, and since the loss of the Prince of Wales in December 1941, none of her class had ventured so far east before. Ironically, on the day of her arrival, the Valiant, resting in a huge Admiralty float in dry dock, was extensively damaged when the structure collapsed, and her wartime service would be finally over. The Howe was soon at sea exercising with units of the Eastern Fleet, and in November, Admiral Fraser would hoist his flag in her as C&C of the British Pacific Fleet, and his second in command, Admiral Power, would be promoted to C&C of the now newly designated East Indies Fleet, and henceforth what had been the old Eastern Fleet was now officially divided into two separate groups. Howe would then sail to Manners via Australia as a prelude to the build-up of the BPF, but prior to that voyage, attacks would take place in and around Sumatra, and the two carriers now involved were the In View Victorious and the Indomitable, on which these forthcoming flight deck scenes were filmed. I suspect this could be a view of Captain Eccles of Indomitable, followed by Rear Admiral Moody, Commander, Eastern Fleet Carriers. The Indomitable was the only British carrier which mainly operated the Fleet Air Arm's most favored fighter, the rugged and reliable Grumman Hellcat. I do find it interesting to observe that some of Indomitable's flight deck crew had resorted to wearing long khaki work pants and shirts, for they were never part of an Admiralty clothing issue. At Portsmouth on November 16, 1944, Admiral Vine invited the King to inspect the ship's company of the Indefatigable just 3 days before she sailed east, escorted by the destroyers Urchin and Undine, as the build-up of the BPF began to accelerate. Though on arrival at Trincomalee, Vine would transfer his flag to the Indomitable. However, just 3 short weeks before those scenes were filmed, the entire royal family had journeyed north to Rosyth to inspect the soon-to-be flagship of the BPF, HMS King George V. And here the footage is far more generous, which enables us to see many members of her ship's company, while especially taking note of the agonizing huff and puff facial expression of the jaunty, alias the dreaded Master-at-Arms.
Important. When ladies are going up and down ladders, avert your eyes. Keep clear of the royal route and no naked bodies in the passageways.
thorough, isn't it? Right there, mate.
After the royal visit, no time was wasted in preparing for a long journey east, and she would in fact sail the following day, October 29th, escorted by the destroyers Meteor, Ursa, and Kempenfeld. But meanwhile, the Howe was already making her way to Manus, which included a very welcome stopover at Sydney.
Said to be the most formidable capital ship afloat is HMS Howe, and she's all British, from her up-to-the-minute armament to the men who man her, the tough fighting men of the Royal Navy. HMS Howe was on a visit to Sydney, Australia, and there was no mistaking the warmth of the welcome she received there. On the dockside, Liberty men await the order to disperse, among them the Royal Marines. Originally a unit of the Home Fleet, the Howe went to the Mediterranean in June 1943 and took part in the Sicilian campaign. She was the first British battleship to enter the port of Taranto when the Italian fleet surrendered, and later on she saw service in the Indian Ocean. Among the many sights ashore is the new shore base Golden Hind. This fine building for Navy men is a palatial recreation centre, just completed. Here, men from the homeland, based in the Dominion, can get a real taste of Australian hospitality. Here, too, the romantically inclined can learn the real meaning of that old Australian custom, waltzing Matilda. HMS Howe's stay in Sydney was short. There's work to be done in the Pacific. The Guard of Honour presents arms as the Rear Admiral in charge of Sydney Naval Establishment comes aboard. Traditions handed down through the centuries are kept alive in the everyday routine of the Royal Navy. England's mighty battle fleet has seen action in many waters. It has practically destroyed the German Navy and overcome the menace of the U-boat, has cleared the Mediterranean, and through hazardous icebound seas has convoyed ships to the relief of Russia. And when there comes the final eclipse of the rising sun, the Royal Navy will be there.
What now constituted the first large gathering of the BPF sailed from Trincomalee to Australia January 16th. En route, it would attack Japanese oil installations in Palembang. The force comprised the KG-5, indomitable, victorious, indefatigable, and illustrious, cruisers Black Prince, Ceylon, Argonaut, and Euryalus, destroyers Grenville, Undine, Ursa, Undaunted, Kempenfelt, Wakeful, Whirlwind, Wager, Wessex, and Whelp. And you may rest assured, had there existed archive footage of all these ships, I would have featured it. Palembang was a formidable proposition, being situated many miles from the Indian Ocean. 2 separate strikes were made, and they probably will remain the largest ever undertaken in the history of the fleet era. The raid was a reasonable success, though losses were quite high, totaling 41 aircraft through various causes. But now the BPF was about to experience its first attack by Japanese aircraft.
All hands remain closed up at short-range weapons for first-degree readiness.
Keep your eyes skinned.
No sign of him yet.
Here they are.
Seven enemy aircraft were reported destroyed without loss, though in the attack, 2 shells allegedly fired from the Euralis hit the flight deck of Illustrious, killing 12 crew members and wounding a further 21. But war cannot be all doom and gloom, and as the fleet continued south, King Neptune would ultimately make his appearance.
I am not accepting this many refusals! First time we've seen one. Quite an honour, isn't it? Get the war! Why are your faces so clean? Just get in the water.
By way of Fremantle, the fleet arrived at Sydney February 10th, remaining there some 18 days, as it also remained a cherished memory in the minds of many people in the years to come. On camera is Admiral Roland, second in command of the BPF, followed by Vice Admiral Vine, commander 1st Carrier Squadron. Unfortunately, the film contains no soundtrack, thus we are unable to hear their voices. Here a Hellcat has been raised on deck for a newsreel camera. But again, as the next naval rating, I do find myself critical of that lack of thought to the crew's need of a practical work dress, which is so patently obvious in these scenes. The illustrious, long plagued with stresses of underwater damage suffered in the Mediterranean back in 1941, had to enter dry dock due to serious problems with her center shaft, and only the temporary solution of removing its propeller could be effected. She would eventually limp home to Ross Isle at barely 20 knots when being relieved by the Formidable during the first Sakashima operations. Meanwhile, the BPF was about to finally depart for the Pacific.
Okay, let's go. Quick. Go on, sir.
The main fleet had now been reinforced by the Howe and 2 cruisers, the In-View Gambia and the Swiftshoe. Manus would be its first destination, where it was to spend 10 very uncomfortable days.
450 each.
The time spent in the hot, humid, debilitating climate of Manus was extremely trying, both for Admiral Bruce Fraser and ship's crews, having to wait until American Admiral Ernest King in Washington finally overcame his reluctance in inviting the BPF to join the U.S. fleet in their operations against Japan. And now, with that approval, as they finally headed towards the war zone of Sakashima Gonto, it was a very relieved Admiral Fraser that this unpleasant suspense was now over, and Jolly Jack was equally relieved to be back at sea again and enjoy its attendant cool breeze, as they here catch a brief glimpse of the destroyer Euralia, though archive footage is more generous in these views of Wager, seen approaching the camera ship on fleet business.
Come on, you lads. Get a move on. Hand again. Come up, hand again.
Here we go. Ready forward? Stand by. Okay, go.
That's it, lads.
Don't worry, pull back.
Early on the morning of March 26th, the fleet reached their flying-off position in the Sakashima area, And here, on board Illustrious, flight deck crews prepare and range aircraft for an attack on Japanese-held airfields.
NVTC, take one position at Zulu.
Flight crews assemble for this historical camera take, and one can only wonder at their thoughts, being some of their squadron had already been lost over Palembang. Only immediately after the war did they learn the devastating news that the Japanese had beheaded those surviving air crews who had been captured.
Come on, chaps. Contact! Contact!
This first Sakashima operation would last for a period of 3 weeks, but without replenishment at sea, this would have been impossible. Thus ended a new innovation, the fleet train. Based at Manus, where these scenes were filmed, it was commanded by Vice Admiral Fisher, humorously presented with a green flag and whistle by Admiral Fraser. In deciding to include in this program some scenes of this base, I did realize it would perhaps not make for particularly exciting viewing, but had I not done so, they would in all probability remain forever unseen, and considering all the officers and men who had the misfortune of being drafted to this oppressive place, having to perform many unenviable mundane tasks, that would have been very remiss of me. Obviously, many ships were to come and go, but permanently based were various repair and maintenance vessels, hospital and accommodation ships, and of course, even tugboats. Carefully offloaded would be these valuable cases of Tooth-Lager beer, while of a more serious nature would be the handling of ammunition, and in the sweltering climate of Manus, working conditions for ratings in these cargo holds must have been extremely arduously unattractive.
Those checks must be in. You just got a nick there?
For those of us that served in the Far East, these are the all too familiar back-scratching signs of the dreaded prickly heat, while in the distance, ratings are seen enjoying some heat relief, bathing from the side of a repair ship. About to refuel and take on board fleet mail at Manus is the cruiser Argonaut. Extensively damaged in the Mediterranean in 1942, she was out of service almost 1 year, undergoing repairs at the Philadelphia Navy Yard.
Heat!
Okay, got it.
This way. Come on.
No chance of one of the inflatables then. 2 left.
Replacement aircraft and repair and maintenance of the same was an obvious essential requirement of the fleet train, and the in-view carrier Unicorn was one such ship involved in this role, though the actual ferrying of replacements was done by the escort carriers of the 30th Squadron, Arbiter, Striker, Speaker, Slinger, and Chaser, with 3 others being Reaper, Ruler, and Vindex. Some, on rare occasions, even shared combat air patrols with the main fleet carriers, and, if necessary, also provided emergency landing on facilities for any aircraft of the operational squadrons so in need. But here, at the fleet base, interplay of aircraft between ships was accomplished by means of these large motorized pontoons, which could accommodate up to 4 aircraft. And while some of the escort carriers seen in these sequences remain unidentifiable to myself, one can be certain they will be from any of those aforementioned names of the 30th Squadron. Certainly aircraft are not the easiest of constructed shapes to manhandle during this interplay between carriers, yet at the same time, due to their fragility, extreme care had to be exercised. Thus a specially devised sling with thimble eyes was secured to lifting points on either side of the fuselage, and, along with steadying lines attached to the tail and main wheel legs, it could then be safely hauled to its desired position. Over 500 RM personnel were permanently shore-based at Manus, which had been retaken from the Japanese the previous year by American forces, who quickly developed this remote tropical island into a major military supply base. And though the RN was responsible for its own logistics, the Americans were often forthcoming with help, and in one classic instance recorded by Admiral Bruce Fraser, re the need to borrow 3 Avenger aircraft, the American admiral in charge on Manus replied they never issued less than 6, and for a bottle of whiskey you could have an even dozen, whereupon the requisition was quickly accommodated, and this single Avenger may well have been one of those aircraft. This is the carrier Pioneer, and, like the Unicorn, she was also employed on aircraft maintenance. Belonging to the Colossus class, she had been specially fitted out with various workshops to facilitate all the technical requirements needed to restore and maintain operational aircraft for frontline combat duties. And as the lower deck rapidly had to develop much-needed advanced skills to meet the essential demands of an accelerating modern-day technology, it was of a time when many officers still traditionally regarded most aspects of seagoing engineering with disdain. We now have an opportunity to see part of the workings of the fleet train as they meet up with the main fleet for refueling purposes many miles south of the Sakashima area. And, as these scenes are self-obvious, I will now purposely refrain from unnecessary dialogue, thus affording the viewer greater visual pleasure.
Ahoy there! Estimate hose release in 10 minutes.
At this point in time, capital ships were still being refueled trailing astern, and only later, with experience gained, would they adopt the more efficient method of steaming directly abeam, as of course is this destroyer Undine.
Would you believe it?
All right, pay attention.
I'll move out the way, come on.
After completion of fleet train business, which, depending on the weather, could sometimes even last for a period of 3 days, the fleet set course for a resumption of Iceberg 1, which would ultimately result in 32 days continuous sea duty, being a British fleet record not seen since the days of Nelson. As the fleet continues on its course back to Sakashima, we are now about to conclude this program. However, in a subsequent edition, I will again endeavor to collate whatever additional surviving archive film I can find, which will take us up to the surrender of Japanese forces in the August of 1945.